Right, so we finished off the Ottoman Empire. Next up, what we're going to look at is what was going on in the Islamic heartlands. Now, by this we mean that what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on in this part of the world, what's happening here. Now, Egypt's clearly declining. We've got our primary evidence of that is the fact that Napoleon has come down and taken over parts of Egypt. Remember, the people in the Middle East had always felt they were superior to the Europeans. Remember the attitude the Ottomans had, there nothing good comes out of Europe, so we don't really have to pay any attention to them. And they're pretty shocked when Europeans come down and take over places like Egypt. In fact, you're going to read at one point that the only thing that makes Napoleon go back to France is that the English cut off his supply lines in the Mediterranean. So it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough. So they have to decide how are they going to reverse this decline in the Islamic world. Well, there are three main options. They could return to their Islamic past. Some rose up to lead jihads, also known as holy wars against the Europeans. Option number two, large-scale adaptation of Western ways. In other words, you can't beat them, join them. Why not become like them, try to copy some of their ways, particularly their military ways? Or you could try to combine the two approaches, and this is what Egypt's Muhammad Ali tries to do. Yes, you've heard that name before, haven't you? I got any sports guys listening right now. You know, you've heard about him. He was the famous boxer from the 60s and the 70s, Muhammad Ali. He's going to try to combine the two. Basically what he does is he says we need to maintain our Islamic traditions, but we're going to adopt Western ways of government and military. So he says we're going to keep our culture. We don't want their culture, but we're going to try to adopt some of their military ideas. Okay, so Napoleon has defeated the Mamluks, the Mamluk forces. Now these are old slave forces. They were once slaves, and they have risen up against the Ottomans and have driven the Ottomans out and really are considered one of the tougher guys. In fact, they're pretty much, do you remember the Mongols rolling in 1258 into this part of the world? And they're really beating up the old Persians and Byzantines and all that. The one group that seems to stand up for them, against them are the Mamluks from Egypt. So the Mamluks have been really tough for a long time. By the 1800s, though, their time has passed. Muhammad Ali tries to reform Egypt, and how does this work? Well, first of all, he tries to adapt European-style military force. He hired French officers in the early 1800s. The French had one of the best land armies around, or if not the best land army around. Remember who's got the best navy? In the 1800s, who did we say earlier had the best navy? That's right, British. British had the best navy. Conscription for peasants. Conscription simply means you're forced into the military. He imported French weapons. He adopts Western military tactics and methods of supply. And he builds really what is the best fighting force in the Middle East and the best navy in the Middle East. That even includes the Ottomans. So he's pretty successful. So how come Egypt doesn't just kick out the Europeans and come to dominate? Well, they got a few problems to go along. But he didn't totally transform the economy to pay for the military. This is part 3 of this. He told peasants to increase production. Hey, thanks. How are we going to increase production if we don't have better technology, more people, if we don't have better workers? How are we going to do that? He does do a few things. He does put in some new harbors. He improves harbors, canals, irrigations, but he can't build his industry because European goods are so much cheaper than the Egyptian-made goods. So what does this mean? Well, he's got some good ideas. Reform the military, streamline the government. Good ideas. Yay, Muhammad Ali. That's supposed to be a picture of him there on the left. Great ideas. Great things. We're all excited for you. Problem. Can't pay for it. And that becomes a real issue. Okay? In fact, the being unable to pay for things will cause the Europeans to be able to dominate. You're about to see that come up here in a little bit. So what kind of economic problems does Egypt face? Number one, they decide that cotton will be their staple crop. Now, we know already from having looked at Latin America, remember they, in their 1880 through 1920 boom period, they also were exporting agricultural crops. It means that you rely on imports of finished goods. And that can be bad because you're not creating large amounts of wealth, and because you're reliant on one staple crop, if the price of that crop drops, yep, you are shafted in the sense that you can't pay for what you once wanted to. And I put in there, see the United States South, if you want to draw a parallel to there. Also, for many of the upper aristocratic large landowners, wealth is wasted on expensive pastimes. And then I got a little sarcastic there going, what? Rich people wasting money on their entertainment? That's got to be unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like that. Like, no, Louis XIV, rather. Louis XIV didn't do that in France with Versailles and entertaining all his friends, did he? No. Okay, so Egypt's problems. It was behind militarily, so it wants to move ahead. It wants to do the reforms, but it can't pay for them. Why? Well, one of the problems is it's dependent upon one crop, that being cotton, and can't rely on the markets. By the way, if you've ever seen, Egyptian cotton is still considered some of the best. That's why I've got a picture of Egyptian cotton sheets up here. Okay. What else does it face economically? Well, Egypt goes into debt to European financiers. Here's what happens. Here's what happens. Let me explain this. When you have a bad crop and you're spending a lot of money, some years you're not going to be able to pay for things. So what do? Well, you go to the bank. Who are the people lending money to Egypt? They're Europeans. So the Europeans gladly lend them money with the understanding they get access to cheap cotton. Remember, their factories in Europe rely on these kind of raw materials. And this is a big one, they want access to the Suez Canal. I've got pictures of the Suez Canal. It's this yellow canal running right here down through Egypt. And then you see a bigger picture here below it with it running down the Red Sea, off to the Arabian Sea, and off to India. From then on, Britain and France continually involve themselves in Egyptian actions. They want to be repaid, and they want more influence. At one moment, the British troops even end up supporting one of the sides in Egypt, rather. In Egypt, they support one of the sides in Egypt, and as such, they gain tremendous influence in Egypt. There's really what we call a puppet government. Now, a puppet government is just what it means. Somebody else is pulling the strings on the puppet or running the puppet. In this case, it's the British. So they look like they have an Egyptian government, but they don't really. Justified after the British fought back in a revolt, and it really begins British rule, direct British rule of the Islamic heartland. And they're going to keep that up. You're going to see all the way up to close to World War II. They're going to take over. After World War I, they'll actually pick up more territory. Okay, so these are the problems they're facing. All right, well, next up, we're going to move to China.